Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. How is everyone doing today? Is everyone going along with your day? Can you hear me okay? If you could give me some response, we will get started. I missed you all last week. There was some personal things I couldn't postpone, and that's why I was not there. But yeah, I'm here today, and we will talk a lot and lot of technical stuff as we move forward. Hopefully, everyone can see me. Nice, good, thank you. Uh, let's do quick activity. What is the current temperature in your city, wherever you are? What is the current temperature? Means let's see where people are joining and how the weather is all over the globe. Let's see that. I'll check mine and I'll let you know what is weather at my place as of now. Hello, weather is 16 degrees. So 16 degree is at my place. 26 in Delhi. Yeah, Delhi is nice. Get extreme heat and extreme cold, isn't it? And then people are from Nairobi, 21, Dubai. Kansham, Dubai has three weathers, I would say: hot, hotter, and hottest. I've been there 4 years. I lived there, and I really miss the sun. 24 degrees Bangalore. You are in a nice place, Janardhan. Bangalore is known to be a very uh, cool weather all year long. 24 degrees. All right. NJ, 12 degrees. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay. Dallas, TX 65. Yeah, Raghavendra from Pune. Then lovely weather in London, UK. Yeah, I agree on that, James. Yeah, I agree on that. All right, thank you so much, everyone. And I'll now be on little more on the side screen, and I'll start with the session. Hopefully, we will be discussing lots and lots of stuff, and I'll be having an agenda in a minute. But yeah, feel free to ask questions. We are responding to the chat, and afterward, also, if you have anything to reach out, feel free, go to LinkedIn, just find us or ping us, and we would be happy to answer questions as we move forward. And if you have any jobs in you are looking for in Amazon, you found something which is useful, and if you feel that we should help you out in referral, we are happy to do that. Maybe we can have a chat before we refer you, just to understand your motivation and your alignment with the job. But yeah, we would be happy to refer you. So feel free to reach out if you have anything where we could help you in getting in your career ladder. We would be happy to do that for you. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Let me get started here. I'll quickly talk about what is going to be the agenda today, and then we will move forward and discuss more interesting stuff. So we divided these sessions into three tracks. First track is technical, which is I would be taking. It would be 40 minutes around. Multi-account structure I'll talk about. Then there is a serverless track which James is heading, and it's a very interesting topic today. It is step functions. So we will talk about step functions. Now, people relate step function only to Lambda, but I'm sure James would elaborate more. There are lots and lots of things which can happen with step functions. Then we have a guest speaker. Prasad would take care of that, and you would be again hearing from lots and lots of interesting point of view on career and then other aspect related to AWS. So let's get started here and let's move forward. Okay. Now, what I'm going to discuss today is a multi-account structure. Now, if you have joined us into first session, you would realize that this session in technical track is on a higher side. I am focusing more on the enterprise architectures or the services which helps you to create an enterprise architecture. The previous session was basics, where we talked about how the AWS works, some of the basic services, but this one is a little bit more on the interesting side of the things. So let's go ahead and discuss this. The first thing is why somebody would need multiple AWS account. Let me try to guess your answers. Tell me what you think, why people would be needing multiple account in AWS. Isn't one account sufficient enough? You could have n number of resources in that, but why somebody would look for multiple account? Anyone? What is your thought? Why somebody would be going for multiple account in AWS environment? What is the benefit in that? Why multiple account? Separation of concern, exactly. Different business function, yes, it could be billing control, yes, it makes sense. Then it's a good to have different account for different environment, make completely saying. Master account will consolidate billing things. So consolidated billing is a good thing to have. Then different business unit, exactly. So yes, these are some of the reasons. Compliances, yeah, that's a good one, Pradeep. So yes, compliance is another one where we would be needing some different accounts. So let me start with my view, like why we need to have different account. And the first reason I would also say is your compliances or your governance requirement, because maybe you are operating into environment where one business unit has a different compliance requirement than the other, and it's better to completely separate them out into different accounts. So that's what we are trying to do here. We would have different governance at all. Second is security policies. Now you may want to give your developer maybe a little bit more flexibility, and that's why you may want to keep security policy little relaxed for internal purposes. But for production account, maybe I would be having a higher control security policies at all. So that is another way I could go ahead for multiple account. Another one is blast radius. If you have one account and let's say if that gets compromised, then you have lots and lots of at risk, right? We don't want to have that risk. Maybe there are stories on internet you could look for where people even stored their backup in the same account and their account got hacked and then their backup was also deleted. So that's not something we should look for, and that's why keeping our blast radius as small as possible. If somebody intentionally unintentionally is doing something wrong, let's keep it to a smaller radius. It will not affect all of my environment. So that's why we may want to have multiple account. Another reason is account limits. There are some limit which AWS would enforce on the users or in the account, and we want to ensure that if we hit those limit, then we have a way around it, and that's why you may want to have multiple AWS account. Maybe a specified resource can be maybe X number of resources can be created. If you already created it, then we would be talking about other things on that. Amit, there's a question. Can you please explain a little more on the security policy? So Amit, things could be that hey, maybe for my developer I want to have higher number of services available, and for production I want to only allow few services which I am actually using, but my developer are doing a lot of experimentation. So let me have a little relaxed security policy for developer, but for production I would have a different security policy implemented. So that could be what my rationale is around security policies. Operational boundaries, there are some logical challenges, maybe geographical challenges, that hey, team in US has to be managed by US environment. That time we would be having an operational boundary in force, and that's why we would be looking for that. So that's what we would be utilizing. There's a question, is this some subscription in Azure? I have no clue on that, Asif. I have no idea on how Azure works, so can't comment on that, sorry. Maybe somebody in the audience knows about it, but not me. Then second last is cost visibility. If I'm having one account and I am paying hundreds of dollars to AWS, maybe I want to know how much I'm paying for project one or project two. There are ways to put tags and then track it, but maybe I want to completely separate out from the cost concern. So that is another thing. Cost visibility is what I could have used it for. And then one more thing, which sometimes people do not realize, is support plans. When you're getting an AWS account, it comes with a support which is called your basic support, right? Basic support is with every account, but what if you have to go for higher level of support like developer support or business support or enterprise support? Support is when you call someone and they help you out, and that ties to your AWS account. So maybe for my developer account, I would take developer support, which is not that costly and it has a different SLA than my production account, for which I may go for a business support plan or an enterprise support plan. So that could be a different story altogether. So idea here is that we want to keep cost low also, and that's why a support plan can also be tied to an account and we could leverage it. So these are my rationale about your multiple account. So this looks good. So we want to go for multiple account, but when you go to multiple account, then you again face some challenges. It's not a very straightforward way. So what we may have operational overhead. Somebody asked me to create a user into one account, and now if I have 10, should I go and create that user into 10 account? That is a lot of operational overhead for me. Then If I have 100 account and if I keep on paying money for every account individually, then there are lots of payment has to be done. Lots of, in the sense, number of payment would increase, the amount will still remain the same, but then somebody has in finance department has to do lot of invoicing and purchase order management. That can be little complicated for them. And then security control, you want to put some restriction on one account, you did that, and then you have 100 more account and you have to repeat the same process on 99 more. That could be very, very complicated. And that's why what we are looking for a way that how these challenges can be sorted out. We don't want lot of operational overhead. We do not need to maintain individual billing. We do not want to consure we do not want to ensure that we control security individually. And that's why we are going to leverage a service in AWS which is called AWS organizations. Organization is a very nice service. Now people think that this is only useful if you have 10, 15 account. Even if you have more than one, I would say organization can be useful, and there is no harm in using it because there is no cost associated with it. So it's a free service. You could leverage it and you should be able to control your environment in much better way. Today maybe you have only two account, but chances are that in future you would add more account, more resources. What about a company acquisition? And that time more account join your environment. And that's why organization can help you in managing multi-account structure. So let's see how AWS organization actually works. Okay, keep your questions coming. We will discuss those questions. I'm looking at the chat. If there is something else, I would be looking into it and I would try to explain it. Let's go ahead and talk about AWS organization here as a structure. So what we would start with to create an organization, somebody would have one account, and here a account is having a number. Here I am using some random number 2722 something. It is basically a random number for an account which is created when you join AWS. Sorry, when you create AWS account, you get an account number associated with your account. Now, that is what we will be referring as a master account, or another word for that, which is now you will find into console, is called management account. So somebody higher up in the change will decide that, hey, we are going to use a management account, and from there we would ensure that we control everything. So there would be a starting point for your AWS organization that would be called management account. Root Revati, root would be created by the management account. Management account would create a root when he or she initializes organization. That time the root would be created. So root, maybe it is little misleading because every AWS account can have a root account, right? So I would still call it a management account or a master account. Yes, what it would do, it would create your organization, or it would initiate, hey, I want to start with AWS organization. As soon as you go ahead with this, what is going to happen? We are going to get a root. It's like a tree, but a tree which is upside down, not its branches are coming from root and then going forward. So it's like a tree. And then that would be the starting point for your organization. There can be only one management account, and which will be initiating the organization structure, and he or she would create a root automatically as soon as you create an organization, right? Now, once the organization is created, what I may want to do, I may want to separate these accounts altogether. And for that, we may create another entity inside them that is called organization unit, which is short called OU. OU is a container, not the Docker container, but a container where you could keep multiple accounts with similar purposes together. It is like a group of accounts put together into a box, and that box is your OU. So here I am representing that, say, hey, I have created a dev OU. And then I have created another OU called QA, and then I have a prod OU created. So what happens here? Then we are creating it that dev OU, QA OU, prod OU, that's all there. Now, can the account that does not start organization become master account? I guess not, but I may be wrong, Venkat. I have to check. Maybe what I'm aware that you could change the payment structure if you want to. So somebody created organization, but the payment can be offloaded to another account, but I'm not sure if the management role can be changed. So I'm not sure on that. I'm not sure on that, Atish. I don't think that is possible to change management account. So, but maybe there is a way support may help you, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Okay. Is the OU similar to OU in Active Directory? It is. It is in a way. It is similar to Active Directory, but it has a little different implications here. What a OU can contain, a OU can further have its own OUs. See this. So I have a prod OU and I say, hey, I want to have a PCI OU inside it and another one for HIPAA. Maybe these are the two type of compliances I want to follow in my production, and let me completely separate out these account as we want to. Now, don't be confused here. These are not account. These are structures which I have created for my tree. And once the structure is ready, then I would start inviting my account if I need to, or add account directly, create right now, or maybe invite existing account. So what we do then, another thing we could do in this tree structure, we could use a component which is called service control policy, or it is like SCP. So SCP is something which would help you to control the security around it, would help you to ensure that components stay together, and then we perform other operations on that. So I'll explain SCP in some time. But here the idea is that we would be creating SCPs, and if you want, you could attach a SCP to a root. SCP stands for Service Control Policy. I would explain more, don't worry. SCP can be attached if you want to a root directly. That is one option. Or this is may not be very well suited for every organization. What you would do, you would be able to attach SCP if you want to other OUs also. But if you attach to root, it automatically boils down to dev QA prod OU. It is automatically applied on those OUs which are beneath it. So you create it on top and it will automatically flow to the bottom child units. So should not be a problem. So SCPs can be created. So maybe from here I have put together very basic stuff which I need to ensure in every account into SCP, applied it to root if I want to, and then fourth thing I would be start doing is add invite member AWS account. I could add new accounts here, or I could invite existing accounts to join my organization. Should not be a problem. Now, homework for you, find out what is the depth of OUs which you could go into. So if you see here, there is a prod OU, then second is a PCI OU, and then within PCI, I may have another environment. So find out, don't reveal answer here if you know. What you could do, you could go up to a certain depth, check on Google, check on your documentation and find out what is the maximum depth I could go up to an OU. So that is possible. Okay. Now, I would have an account here. Now, account contains your resources. People get confused here. They think that once I have an organization, all my resources would belong to one single account. That is completely wrong. Your account would still be having your resources. So your resources are still within the boundary of your account. It is not going anywhere. It is only within that account where your resources would be managed. So resource stay within that account. So there is another account I have added here ending with 239, and that is my second account which I have created, right? So that's how I could move forward. What next? Maybe I have another account, it has its other resources. I'm using different symbols here. Maybe some resource have lambda, another one has a transit gateway. They would still belong to a different account structure, and they will all be called member account, right? What happens that we cannot have a account member of more than one organization. You could move account across or within organization. Let's say account number 239 belongs to dev and I want to move it to QA or prod. That should not be a problem. That's not an issue, right? So that's how it will. Can we invite master account? See, invitation you could send to anyone at it. No restriction on that. I could invite you, you could invite me, but whether I would be joining or not, that's a different story. So if a account is part of an organization, it cannot become member of another organization. It has to leave the organization, and then only it can be part of another organization. And if you feel that could happen in your environment, you can put policies which could restrict users from leaving AWS organization unless admin approves. So that is possible. So those options are also there, but at a time it would be only one invitation can be sent. Will that invitation work or not? That's a different story. Can we have resources within different account and organization communicate with each other? Asif, that is your decision, right? These are resources which are individually created, and if you feel they should communicate with each other, why not? Nobody's stopping you. You configure networking, you configure endpoint, and you should be able to talk to each of them if you configure them in such a way. Like you could configure your account to talk to any other AWS account. The same applies here also. It is only giving you a structure to manage your environment. Okay, so yes, that is possible. That would depend on public and other settings which you have created. Now, once I have this SCP, probably I may also need more SCP, which may be giving me very specific control for a specific requirement. So what I would be doing, that we would be able to attach SCP further. So you may attach a SCP at the root, and then you can still say, hey, I want to attach a SCP at dev OU also, should not be a problem, right? So we'll discuss that. We will discuss more information around that. Now, good question here. If the service control policy is attached to the root, would it not restrict the operation of the other OU? Means it would. It's not, it's a root. See, it would not affect master account. Master account has no influence of SCP. Other account which would be part of dev OU, QA OU, they would be now having two SCPs applied if you see into this picture, because one SCP is coming from root and second SCP I attached directly to dev OU, and that would be also influencing the resources or the permission in master account 2 and 3. What would happen now? In this account 2 and 3, I would have SCP1 and SCP2 both applied together, because that is one is coming from root. So those policies you have to follow, and then you have to follow your own OU policies. Like think like that, if you are living into a country, you follow the country's law, and maybe if your state mandates some specific laws or city mandates some laws, you would also be following those laws also. So both would be applied together. So yes, that would be there. Okay, next. What happens now? That SCP-1 is only being applied on member account here, which is 6391, and then maybe I could say SCP-3. This time I want to apply it directly to the account, so that is also possible. So three places where you could attach a SCP. One is root, second is any of the organization unit, and third is it could be any of the member account also. It depends on what your use cases are, but these are the ways where you could have a SCP associated. Right. How this looks into console, better to understand it there. Let me go ahead quickly to console and I'll show you the organization structure. Now, organization I have already created, and then it was created long before. I didn't want to delete it because I have some demos around it, and that's why I would be showing you how to create OU and how to invite other accounts so that they could join. You could invite any account, whether they would accept or not, that would obviously depend on them. So it's a two-way handshake. You send them request and they would join. You can't force anyone to join your account unless they accept it. So I am in organization. Here is my root. If this, you see this account, this one is 8023 ending with, this one is my management account, and that is where, see this was also created, and I have another account which is this ending with 2569, and that is on 156, but I do not have any structure around as of now. If I want, I could go ahead and say let me create a OU, and this OU I could call, hey, this is my dev OU, let me create an organization unit. Once we have created this organization unit, what I could do, I could say, hey, account, you want to be part of dev. So let me select you, and I could move you to the dev organization unit, which I have selected, or I could bring it back. It is purely up to me. So now I am trying to put a structure around my organization, add a dev, and now dev belongs to that. Similarly, let me add another account here. Sorry, let me add another OU if I want to. So I'm creating a new OU and I'm calling it prod, and now I would be creating that organization unit, and in this I want to invite an account. See this, here is my invitation, so I could select invitation, and here I could say, hey, I want to invite account. This account invitation was sent on this date, it was accepted, sorry, no, it was expiration was this, and let me invite other accounts here. I could invite any account. If I need to know is their email address which they use to create that account, and I may need to know their account ID, and obviously I could invite multiple account in the same thing. You could have like yeah, messages include email messages, and you could put some personal message to send to them if you want to. So that is that easy to get started, not a very complicated thing. You could get started with anytime when you want to utilize this. So let me try to see if I could invite one more account here. If I have not used that, again, let me select this account email address or the account ID. So this is my account ID, and I say, hey, I want to send invitation to this. So what would happen now? AWS will figure out who is the owner email address of this account, and that email address would be getting an invitation. When they accept invitation, then they would be showing here at root, and then you can navigate them or put them into any other structure. So if you see this one is currently open. I haven't accepted it. I will open my browser or my email address. This is all belong to me. If you read the names, it will show that this all belongs to me. So now I have get invitation, and I would be then moving forward with that. Let's see what happens, how the invitation actually looks like. So here is the invitation which has come to me, and it says, hey, invitation to join an organization owned Ashish Praja at amazon.com would like to add you to this account. Are you happy? I say, yes, I am happy, and I would be accepting this invitation now. And now my acceptance is done. I now belong to organization, and afterwards I should be able to be influenced by the SCPs which apply on top of it. So this is how the structure actually looks like. I may have to refresh it in a minute or so. I would be getting here confirmation, and then I can put that account to any location within my structure if I want to, and then those policy would apply automatically on it. Okay, so it's up to you how you want to start. You could create account as a or you invite account, or you could create your no account also. That should not be a problem. All right. What is the difference in account creation process for master account and member account? Nothing. Senthil, nothing. See, master account and your member account, there are two ways. One option is you could say master account or management account would create a new account for me. So that is possible. Or you could say somebody has already created an account and I would invite it. In this process, when I am creating a new account, I may not want to have a structure created on that. So if you see this account structure, right now I do not see them. But if I go here, I should be able to see other account are currently empty, and I should be able to see these account if you see here. Right. So I can't create account from here, but I would explain you in a minute that you could have something called a control tower mechanism by which you should be able to access it. Right. So hopefully this thing is clear. Account structure is ready, and we could have added any account we need on that. Now let's focus on SCP because they give you a very nice control on your structure. So let's go ahead and talk about service control policies here. Now, if you see, attachment can happen on root level, attachment can happen on other levels also, and on that reflective policies would be applied on that. And if you see here, I could have more settings here like services. I could have some services enabled across the organization. So if I want to use AWS config or CloudTrail, I could have enabled it from one location and it would be enforced on all my accounts. So that is much easier for you. So that is what AWS organization structure is. Okay. Now, SCP are not very complicated. SCP are still the same type of JSON language which you see for any IAM permissions. So any IAM permission, they have the same format, effect, action, resources, and that exact same thing is happening here too. We are just taking care of putting them, and these policies will be called SCP. Now, there is a major difference between SCPs and IAM policy. They look similar, but SCP do not give permission. They are kind of a allow or deny list. SCP don't directly give you permission. I'll explain what I mean by this statement. But if somebody has applied a SCP, it doesn't mean that you have got that permission. You may get that permission. That is what we are doing. Yes, exactly. We are doing here only whitelisting or blocklisting a specific service, but we are not giving you a specific thing into use. Let's see one example here. So let's say I have a SCP here which says allow EC2 star Allow S3 star means everything in S3 and everything in EC2 is allowed. And then I have a IAM entity policy which is having EC2 allowed and SQS allowed. So what would happen if then user is trying to log in or perform some operation? Let's see what would be happening here. So these are the two policies, SCPs, SCP and IAM. I would give you four options. First option, you may say EC2 would also be allowed, S3 will also be allowed, and then SQS will also be allowed. Option one. Option two, you may say EC2 will only allow and only S3 would allow because this one is coming from SCP only. That one. Third, you may say, hey, that doesn't make sense. EC2 will be allowed, SQS will be allowed because it is coming from IAM only. That would take precedence. Or you could say only EC2 would be allowed because it is intersection of both the policies. What should happen? What should be effective policy in that case? Anyone, what should be the effective policy in this case? Anyone? Yeah, Vimal, that's a good example. SCP is just a firewall. Yeah, it's a good example. I'm getting 1 and 4, 1 and 4. Last one. Okay, yeah, that's the answer. The answer is 4. Let me give an example here. Let's say that again, I want to explain things in as easy as possible. Let's take bank account example. I do my banking with a bank called Barclays. Now, in Barclays, I have an account and then there is a limit of cash withdrawal, which I could go only up to £500 per day, not beyond it. Whatever the money is in my account doesn't matter. The maximum cash withdrawal per day is £500. Now, let's consider two situations. Situation one, that my account balance and let's say withdrawal request. All right, let's go ahead and talk about these situations. So let me explain situation number one. In situation one, my account balance is let's say £1,000, and then I want to withdraw £1,000. Then situation two, my account balance is £300 or £200, and I want to withdraw £500. And third situation, my account balance is £550 and I want to withdraw £500. Right. What we mean by that? Consider the policy set by your bank is your SCP. Right. So you can't go beyond that. Whatever your bank has said, that is the maximum you could withdraw. You can't go beyond it. So account balance is 1,000, means sufficient money in my account. I am trying to withdraw my $1,000 or pound, but that would be denied. Why it would be denied? Because SCP has put a limit of 400. Right. In this case, S2, my balance is 200 and I am trying to withdraw 500. Now bank said that yes, I could withdraw 500 per day. That doesn't mean that bank is going to put 300 from their pocket in my account and then would allow me to withdraw 500. If there is a bank like this, I would be happy to open account there, and probably everyone in the world would be happy to open account there who is putting money from their pocket into a customer's account. But obviously this is not going to happen. So even if I have withdrawal request of 500, it would still be denied. The max I would be able to withdraw will be 200, not 500. Now in this case, situation 3, obviously it would be allowed. Why? Because my SCP is permitting and my withdrawal request is also within that limit, and my account balance is also for sufficient enough. So hopefully this explains you that how SCP is applied. So SCP do not give you permission, they just give you the maximum permission you may get or maximum deny you may have, and then still your IAM policy would also be there. Right. So hopefully this thing is clear. So maybe your country allows you to buy houses. It doesn't mean that you can buy a house unless you have money. So you should have money, and then you should have the approval also. Like if a foreign national goes into some countries, they may not be allowed to have a uh, property bought for them. So that's how these things are. So hopefully this thing clear and everyone has understood what SCPs are. So SCP would always perform interaction. So it would check, is it allowed by SCP? If yes, is it also allowed by IAM? And then only it is going to move forward. Otherwise, it's not going to move forward. So that's how SCPs actually work, right? All right, good. Hopefully everyone is enjoying. Let me give you some sample examples of SCP. Now, if you read this SCP, this policy says deny, and then in action we have EC to attach internet gateway, EC to create internet gateway, attach egress only, create VPC peering, accept VPC peering. What we are doing here, we are ensuring that nobody can attach a internet gateway, not even directly, not even from a VPC peering. So that's how we could put this into an account which I want to ensure as a sandbox, that nobody should ever have internet access in that account in any resource. That's the best example to put it into a policy like this. So that's a good thing which you could do, right? Another example of a SCP, you could say stop CloudTrail from being disabled. Maybe somebody, if they hacked your account, the first thing they would be doing to hide their track, if that was me who has hacked your account, first thing I would look for is to disable CloudTrail so my tracks are not there. But that's what we could do. We could put into a disable state, and then similarly there are lots of service control policies which we give you, and you can get started from there. So that is how your SCPs work. So I tried to explain what SCPs are, I tried to explain what organization is, and we could utilize that, right? Can we use SCP to specify the service limit for each service as well? Service limit, not in that way. Service limits are not controlled by this, but you could put Parna, some calculation would be required. Somebody would need to actively check what are the service limit, because service limit is not enforced by SCP. But yes, somebody can put some restriction based on, hey, maybe I don't want to use a specific region, or maybe I don't want to allow to use a T5 dot or C5 dot metal instances or I3 dot metal instances. So those type of restrictions can be there, but I don't think a service limit can be there. But yeah, if you could be creative, if you could dynamically generate this policy and apply, maybe yes, but I'm not aware about any defined definite example as of now. So what you have seen here is a way of creating a multi-account structure. Now what I've shown you is a manual way of creating these structure. If you don't want to manually do all these things, then you could leverage another service which is called AWS Control Tower. Control Tower is basically a mechanism which helps you to set up a best practice based account structure, including organization and additional services to get started quickly. Right. Let me give an example again so that you understand it better. Let's say you get a task to design an airport. Right. Now, designing an airport is not like doing a IKEA DIY table or just fixing a bulb which is not working. This is a very complicated piece of infrastructure which you have to design. And obviously, you need to then think about, hey, how the travel would happen. Travel in the sense how the flights would come in. You have to explain or understand how your people management would happen. You have to take care of security. You have to take care of scanning of luggage, unloading, and then uploading of your luggage and other things. Then maybe passport control, maybe quarantine requirement. So you could see, like in a network there is a packet flowing, here people are flowing. In a account in a airport there would be secure area. Similarly, in your account also you would have secure area. You may have a policy to follow, and exactly same thing would happen in your account too. So designing an airport is possible, but it is not a very straightforward, like I could start it from tomorrow if I don't have skill. So you may have to ask yourself lots of questions, or you have to check what compliance requirements are, how how the flow of people would be, how the flow of goods will be, how the people would enter, how security people would enter. Lots of things today. Now, good thing is, you may not be the first person in the world who is designing an airport, and there has already been people or companies who are operating successfully airport, and then those best practices are documented somewhere. So what if I could leverage or use those best practices rather than creating my own best practices and starting everything from scratch? And that's where your AWS control tower comes into. So what control tower will do? Control tower will set up a new multi-account structure for you automatically. If you do this thing manually, then you have to do lots of setup, like create a bucket for CloudTrail, then create a log archive, then create a second security account, at least read only user, power user, admin user is what most of the people use. Then you have to configure single sign-on that. Then you have to secure your root credential, then link organization to master account, enable CloudTrail on different setup account, any account you add. So it's a lots and lot of structure which you have to follow along. So to help you in that case, what we offer you a control tower. Now, saying it again, control tower is an automated way to do the things in a well documented and best practice manner. If you want to do these things manually, nobody is stopping you. You could still do the all these things manually. But if you are using control tower, then thing is that we do lot of heavy lifting for you, and in 60 to 90 minutes, you get a well best practices based account ready for you with structure, with CloudTrail, with guardrails, account factory inside that, a dashboard where you could see compliance and non-compliance of the stuff. So control tower can be used to augment your existing environment, or if you are starting from scratch, you could use that also. Now, that is a common confusion between control tower users is that, hey, control tower is only for greenfield deployment. Greenfield deployment is something somebody starting new. A field is green, nobody has done anything, it is untouched, green field, first time starting. Then we call it brown field, means there is some changes happened or there is existing environment already running. So control tower help you in both cases. It's not only for green field, it could help you in green field deployment as well as brown field deployment, means either you already are having a structure and want to move to control tower, or you are first time starting and you are moving to control tower. It is purely up to you how you want to handle it. So both options are available for you. So control tower helps you in setting organization, but if you want to have organization without doing anything, then manually also you could do it, should not be a problem. So I'd stop here now, 40 minutes. Hopefully you have understood things. And if you have any follow-up questions, any confusions, anything which could not work or could not understand, we would be utilizing. Is control tower in the free tier? No. See, control tower service is free. I'm not sure if it is in free tier or not, but it can create resources which may cost money, because it would enable CloudTrail and start collecting your logs into a standard bucket, right? So that would mean that your would be charged if it goes beyond the free tier limit. So control tower as a service itself is free, but it may create resources which may cost money. So be just aware about that. But I think there is some pricing. Thanks for that. I have to check the pricing thing. So check this link and probably you should be able to get more details on that. Okay, good. Thank you. All right. Is it move to immigrate from landing zone to control tower? Yes, it is. There are just a document and you will documentation, and there are guide in a well documented format, and you can find that step by step instruction to move from existing one to control tower. So yes, those options are available. Okay. So I'll stop here and let me know questions afterward. Feel free to share what you have learned on LinkedIn. Make sure other people are also aware about BESA program so that a lot of people will get benefited. And if there is anything we could help you with your career journey, feel free to reach out. We may not respond that very moment, but yes, we are more than willing to help you out in your career journey. So thank you so much. I'll stop here and we will then take a short break and start again. So enjoy your break. Afterwards, James would talk about serverless and we would be seeing step functions. So don't miss it. Be back in 5 minutes and we will then discuss more interesting stuff. Okay. Enjoy your time. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being back. I will add James to stream and we will get started. Welcome, James.
Ish.
Thank you for being here.
No, thank you. Hello, everyone. How are we all doing today? Whatever time of day it is for you, wherever you are. Excellent. I see the messages coming in. I was getting a little bit jealous earlier of seeing some of the temperatures. It's starting to get cold here in the UK. So seeing the temperature in some of the places where you are was, yeah, I'm a little bit jealous. So, yeah, as she said, today we are going to be talking about my absolute favorite AWS service, which is step functions. And step functions is one of the most powerful AWS services, as we'll find out as we get through the next half an hour or so. But first, who, if you could just put a quick note in the chat, who has actually used step functions or has heard of step functions? If you just put a yes or a thumbs up in the chat, just to see who's familiar with step functions. Yeah, yes, Prasad. I know you were, Prasad. Never heard of it. Excellent. That's good. Serverless Espresso. Yes, absolutely, Venkat. Serverless Espresso is a really awesome workshop, actually. I'll post a link to that in the chat afterwards because that's a really good workshop for getting used to step functions. Okay, so some people have heard of it, some people haven't. Okay, so let's dive in. So as we've talked about on some of the other sessions we've had on this serverless track, when you start building serverless applications, especially using things like Lambda, which are these single purpose small blocks of code, things can get quite spread out and quite distributed. And these Lambda functions are completely stateless, as we've talked about in the past. So when a Lambda function execution environment gets cleaned up, you lose all the state that comes a lot with that Lambda on that Lambda. They're event-driven things. And as serverless applications grow and grow, you get more and more and more of these functions. And it's actually quite common for fully serverless services to have lots and lots of these little Lambda functions. But of course, these Lambda functions don't exist on their own. These functions are going to need to talk to each other in some way to get business work done. Now, of course, we can call a Lambda function from another Lambda function. That's possible. Everything's an API call in AWS, of course, but that's not generally advised as being a good thing to do. And that's when you start chaining these Lambda functions together. And that comes back to what we were talking about when we talked about event-driven architecture. Because if we start chaining these Lambda functions together in a synchronous way, if one of them Lambda functions fails, we've then got to kind of worry about that in all our other Lambda functions. So it moves away from that event-driven use case that Lambda is built for. So that's one of the challenges as you start to build out serverless applications. How do you orchestrate these Lambda functions together to perform a business action? And as well, there's some quite interesting things you might want to do within your application. So we've just talked about sequencing tasks there, calling lambdas one after each other, but we might want to do retries, to retry a lambda function if it fails, or we might want to do things in parallel, or based on the output of a lambda function, what's returned, we might want to make a different decision and route our business workflow in different ways. Now, if anyone here has tried writing code to handle all of these different scenarios and all these different use cases, it's actually really quite difficult to do, to handle all of the different details and things that you need to worry about when you're trying to write code. So how can we solve this challenge? Well, I've kind of given away the answer to this question when I started talking, because of course the answer to all of this is AWS step functions. So step functions is at its core, it's a completely serverless workflow engine, or it's commonly called a state machine if you've heard of state machines. And step functions allow you to orchestrate together these different pieces of functionality, these different building blocks within your application to perform business workflows. And step functions can also carry state. So with Lambda functions, where a Lambda function stops running or gets shut down, you lose the state. Step functions can persist that state over a long period of time. When a workflow executes, each of the steps of the workflow are called a state, And when your workflow moves from step to step, that's called a state transition. So that's the kind of terminology you see around step functions. If you start reading into it and you start seeing the word state machine being bandied around, just think of step functions as a workflow engine at its core. And it allows you to really easily reuse different components across different parts of your application. Or maybe you need to make a change to your business workflow. You need to swap out one piece of code for another. Well, you can do that. You can just sub out a call to one Lambda function for maybe another Lambda function. So when we define step functions, under the hood, behind the scenes, if you will, everything's written in what's called Amazon States language. And that's what you can see on the left-hand side there. So it's either a JSON or a YAML-based syntax. And it can be, I know when I first started using step functions, this was one of the challenges. The onboarding ramp, if you will, for learning ASL can be quite challenging. It's a different language, it's a different structure. And if you're building out really complicated workflows, to try and visualize what's going on can be quite tricky. Once you've put that JSON or YAML into the console, however, you get this really nice visualization that you can see in the middle there. So that's the AWS console kind of demonstrating to you how your workflow looks. And if you use Visual Studio Code for doing any work, there is actually a plugin for Visual Studio Code, which I will also put in the chat, for visualizing your workflow in Visual Studio Code. It's quite cool. Once you've executed an instance of your workflow, you can then actually go into the console and look at the execution. So that's what you can see over on the right-hand side there. And that's actually a really powerful debugging tool, because you can actually go in and look for a specific execution of your workflow, exactly how that specific request routed through your workflow. So it's really powerful. But like I said, this JSON or YAML syntax is it's quite an onboarding ramp to get used to it. And if you're trying to work with business people, maybe non-technical people, to design these workflows, they're not going to understand JSON or YAML. They might do a little bit, but they're not going to be able to sit down and look at that and understand what's going on. So there's one of two features that step functions have released in the last year that have made it my favorite service. And the first one is the step functions workflow studio. Now, the step functions workflow studio is a drag and drop interface that you can use to build out your workflows. So on the left-hand side, you have a list of all the available components that you can put into your workflow. You can drag and drop and build that in this nice visual designer. And when you've finished building your workflow in the designer, you can then export it as ASL. And then you can put that ASL into your version control, or however you want to deploy that ASL. And then when you want to make a change, you can import that ASL back into the workflow studio and make your change. And that's typically how I myself develop step functions. I don't write ASL, pure ASL. I build it in the studio, export the ASL, do some things with the ASL. This is powerful even outside of developer productivity, because now we can sit down as technical people with non-technical people and actually build a workflow together. So yes, they might not understand what Lambda is or what SNS is, but they can still visualize this flow diagram and put their finger on the diagram and kind of work out how a workflow will run. So it's a really powerful way to start to build out business workflows. Within step functions, there's a few different types of task that you can run within these states. So a task state type is the simplest. A task is when you do some work. So calling a Lambda function is considered a task. Maybe you publish a message to EventBridge. That is also considered a task. But there's a few other built-in types of state that you can have in step functions. So things like branching logic, so like if-else statements within your workflow to change the route of the workflow based on some of the state. You can add delays. You can run things in parallel. You can run for each loops with the map state. So there's a lot of these really interesting different things you can start to do to build out your workflows. And then you've got things like pass and succeed and fail, and they're more transitionary states. So a pass state allows you to transform your state in some way. Or you can commonly use a pass state as a placeholder just to put there and it won't do anything. And then succeed and fail are quite self-explanatory. If you put a fail state in your workflow, that will then error the workflow, and that execution of your workflow will be displayed as an error. So these are the different things you can start to do. The most common ones I tend to find myself using are things like choice, to kind of make a decision on your business workflow based on what you need to do. And of course, the task state to actually do some work. There's a couple of different types of step functions workflows that you can get. So there's standard workflows and there's express workflows. There's quite a few differences between the two. So the 5 or so I've called out on screen here are some of the more important ones to understand. So standard workflows guarantee you exactly once execution. So you're guaranteed that workflow will run exactly once. Express workflows, however, are guaranteed at least once, which means that a given workflow or a given step within an express workflow might actually execute multiple times. So you need to handle that. There's some different supported integrations between standard and express. Slightly different pricing model between the two. One of the most interesting features of express workflows is some of the integrations that express workflows have. So express workflows can integrate directly with a service like API Gateway. So API Gateway can trigger your workflow and then wait for your workflow to complete. And then whatever gets returned from your workflow will be returned back to API Gateway and back to the caller. So you can actually build entire APIs on top of step functions. The kind of easiest way at a high level to choose between standard and express is that if you are building a long running business workflow, so standard workflows can run for up to 12 months. If you're building a long running business workflow that you need to guarantee executes exactly once, you're building a payment processing workflow, for example, you don't really want to be charging people's cards multiple times. So standard is more for these long-lived business workflows. Express workflows are typically for shorter data ingestion type workflows. So express workflows can only run for up to 15 minutes. And they typically are like things like IoT. If an IoT sensor is sending data to your system, you could use an express workflow to process that data. There's a link there on the slide. Again, I can put these links in the chat once I'm finished to kind of give you some information between the differences between the two. But like I said, standard business workflows, long running, guaranteed execution, express, faster, higher throughput, data ingestion type tasks. So, sorry, yeah, that is absolutely right. The comment, I'm getting confused with Lambda and step functions. It is 5 minutes. That is a very good point. Thank you for calling that out. The second feature that made step functions one of my favorite AWS services is actually the integration. So typically, step functions only integrated with around 17 AWS services. So things like Lambda, EventBridge, DynamoDB, they had these optimized integrations. But last year, the step functions team released the SDK integrations. And that actually means you can call almost any AWS service directly from within your workflow. That's over 10,000 API actions that you can call. I'm yet to find a service that you cannot call directly from step functions. So if somebody does, please tweet me, because I would be interested to hear what that service is. And this is incredibly powerful now, because you think you've got these building blocks now to be able to build out your workflows, but integrate with almost any AWS service. Translation, sentiment analysis, text to speech, all of these kind of services can be triggered directly from within your workflow without the need for a Lambda or something sat in the middle. Now, commonly when I start talking about these direct service integrations and the fact we can now start to remove Lambda, a lot of people ask me, is this the moment in time where robots start to take over our jobs as programmers, right? If we're building all of these things with these visual designers and everything's service integrations, what do us developers do? Are these low-code, no-code solutions the future of development? And when I think about that, I think these solutions like step functions allow you to focus on the things that matter to your business. So these low code, no code solutions where you can call an AWS service directly from your workflow, that allows you, it gives you one less thing to worry about as a developer. You don't have to maintain some code. You don't have to operate a Lambda function and worry about a Lambda function scaling, for example, because step functions calling that integration directly, all of that operational burden then is on AWS. It's on us. There's no operational burden there for you as developers. And it's that undifferentiated heavy lifting that we talk about a lot at AWS, and we're removing even more of that now. Now you don't need to manage a Lambda function just to call the translate API. You can do that directly from your workflow. And that's one less thing for you to worry about. But then, of course, how do we determine which parts of our application are important to focus on? And just to really quickly talk about this before I come back to step function, I just want to mention domain-driven design really quickly. So I know Jamila was talking about books a few weeks ago, so I even brought the book on my desk. This book is called Domain-Driven Design by somebody called Eric Evans. And it was released in the early 2000s. And it's a book about how to start to design complex software, how to think about complex software. And as you can see, it's quite a chunky book. So I'm not going to talk about it in its entirety, but one part of domain-driven design I wanted to talk about is this idea of subdomains. So within every application or system, there'll be a few different types of domains. Okay, there'll be the core domain, and it's the core domain that is the unique selling point, the money maker, the thing that absolutely delights your customers, the reason they're choosing to use your service, whatever it is. This is the part of your application that you want to focus the most time and effort on from a development perspective, because this is the bit where you're really adding value to your customers. You've got the supporting subdomain, and the supporting subdomains are things that your system needs to work, but aren't necessarily differentiating in the workplace. So things like using Lambda instead of EC2. Everybody needs to use compute in some way. That supporting subdomain is it kind of abstracts that away a little bit further. So you want to focus slightly less effort on the supporting subdomain. And that's where things like step functions can get really powerful. If you need to add translation to your application in some way, rather than writing a load of custom code to do that translation, if you just build a step function that calls the translate API directly, that's just that service then is operated completely by AWS, and your core domain can just call that service. And then you've got generic subdomains. Generic subdomains are things like sending emails, things that every single business needs to do. You want to focus as little effort there as possible. So the reason why I've called this out in the context of step functions is that we want to focus as much time as possible as developers on this core domain, on the thing that's going to delight our customers. How can you obsess over your customers? Focus your effort here. And if you can start to remove some of that heavy lifting from the other parts of your application using services like step functions and the native service integrations, it allows you to focus even more on delighting your customers. Sorry for the little sidebar. We will come back to step functions now. So when you are doing work within step functions, there's a couple of different types of, three different types of ways you can do work. So there's request response, there's synchronous or run a job, and then there's the wait for callback pattern. And I'm going to talk through each of these in some detail now, because it's quite interesting to understand how each of these different features work. So the request response integration pattern is kind of the standard or the default integration pattern in step functions. So things like if I have a workflow that maybe makes a get object call to S3, that's going to be synchronous. I'm going to call to S3, and S3 is going to respond with some data. The same as if I call Lambda. If I call Lambda from step functions, the step function will wait for the Lambda function to finish, return some data, and then the workflow will continue. So these are the request response patterns. Where this gets quite interesting is with services like EventBridge and SNS, these kind of pub subtype services, because although this is still a request response pattern, so step functions makes a call to EventBridge, Event Bridge isn't going to return some data as such, like Lambda would. So Event Bridge just returns an acknowledgement to say yes, success, or failure potentially if Event Bridge was offline, for example. But it's still synchronous in some respects. There's just no data to be returned from something like Event Bridge. So that's the kind of synchronous pattern. The synchronous pattern is supported across all of the SDK integrations. Like I said, this is kind of the default pattern for how step functions makes a call out to an AWS service. The second integration pattern, and this is probably my favorite pattern actually, is the wait for callback pattern, or wait for task token. And this is where you can tell your workflow to pause until it's told to continue. Okay, where it's waiting for a callback to say, yep, carry on with your work. So how that works is with things like SQS, and I will hopefully get time to go into the console and kind of show you how to configure this. But a common use case I see for this is if my workflow puts something onto maybe an SQS queue, and then we need to wait for whatever's processing the records in that queue to tell us what's happened. So we make a call to SQS, and within that message we send to SQS, we include a uniquely generated token, a task token. We have some kind of receiver that might be EC2, it might be Lambda, it doesn't particularly matter what that receiver is, but that receiver will do some work. It will process that message. And once it's finished doing its work, it will then make an API call back to step functions to either send a failure or send a success. Okay, so in this instance here, our receiver's done some work. It can't actually process the message, so it sends a task failure back to step functions, and it includes that task token that was generated. And that's how step functions then knows to, okay, I can continue, and it's a failure, so I'm going to send that off down the failure route, down the try catch. There's also an API call, of course, for send task success. So when I run send task success, the workflow will just continue again, passing in that task token. Now, where this gets quite powerful is you can actually pass in some data as well. So when you run that send task success API call, you pass in the token, which links back to the actual workflow, but you can also pass in some data. So if you think of the request reply pattern that we talked about last week, when we talked about messaging patterns, that's where we can almost make a query to an external system and get that data back, but completely asynchronously. We can use a wait for callback. So we make the query request and our workflow pauses. The consumer does some work and then sends that data back to our workflow, and our workflow continues. So it's an incredibly powerful integration pattern for building out business workflows. The wait for callback pattern is also supported for all of the SDK integration. So the request response and wait for callback are supported everywhere. And the final integration type is what's called run a job or synchronous. Okay, and the example here is using the AWS service called Athena, and Athena is a serverless, in essence, a query engine. It allows you to run queries against things like S3. Okay, and the way you actually call Athena is you just tell it to query a data set, and the API just returns straight away, and then you have to poll Athena to wait and see when that query is actually completed running. Okay, so if Sorry about that. It seems my laptop just decided to disconnect itself from the internet, as is very useful when you're presenting to a live audience. Hello, I'm back. Could somebody just put in the chat when you actually lost me? Yes, everything fails all the time. Good point. Whereabouts was it that you lost me? If somebody could just put a note in the chat. Thank you. It's good to be back. Athena example. Okay, awesome. I will just start from here then. So yeah, if I was using step function and just made a call to Athena, this would just return straight away and the workflow would just continue. So I'd make the API request to Athena from my workflow, and that the workflow would just continue because you need to poll Athena to work out when the query is actually finished. Now, if you use this synchronous or run a job method, step functions manages that polling on my behalf. So I can run that query dataset command with the .sync suffix, and step functions will now manage that on my behalf. It will wait for Athena to actually say, yes, that query is completed, and then we can go off and actually get the results, which is a synchronous request response request. And this is relevant for services like Athena, EMR, Glue. If you're triggering like code build to do maybe some building, maybe you're running a container on ECS. This is where this gets really, really quite powerful, where you can actually take that complexity of doing the polling and let step functions do that polling for you. This is not supported with the SDK. Okay, so the request response, wait for callback, yep, supported for everything. You cannot use this run a job for SDK integrations yet. So really quickly, I just want to talk about one other feature of step functions, which is called step functions intrinsic functions. Okay, and these are methods of functions that you can call within your workflow to do some quite cool and interesting things, actually. So you can generate random numbers, generate unique identifiers, base64 encode and decode strings. So you can do all these really interesting things from within your workflow without needing to call out to Lambda. So if you're potentially building an API on top of API gateway and step functions, you can actually generate a unique ID within your workflow using that states.uuid method. And just before I close off and hand over to Prasad, I'd really, really encourage you all, if you are interested in step functions, to go and check out the Serverless Land website. I will post this link into the chat as well. But this is where the serverless developer advocacy team at AWS have started to collate these examples of really cool and interesting things you can do with step functions. If you go to the website, see something that looks interesting, you can actually deploy it into your own AWS account directly from within the Serverless Land website. And of course, because this is completely serverless, it will only cost you money when the code is actually running, when your workflow is actually running. And there is a free tier as well with step functions. I know someone mentioned Serverless Espresso earlier on. So Serverless Espresso is a serverless coffee shop that the Serverless DA team built to demonstrate event-driven architectures and step functions. When they ran that at reInvent, they served thousands and thousands of coffee, and the cost was incredibly low. So it's a really efficient service, much like the rest of the serverless services. I will post some notes in the chat, of course. And yeah, Prasad, I believe it is over to you, my friend.
Let me unmute myself. Can you hear me, James? If you can give me a thumbs up.
I can indeed, sir.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, cool. So now we will on to the final section, which is behavioral. And I'll invite our guest speaker in a moment. But before that, so see what we are trying to like do here with the guest speakers is that try and give you different perspectives of how people were able to make it to cloud and how were they successful in the cloud journey. Balwinder shared her journey about how, after a career break, she was able to get started with cloud and made it to Microsoft. And then Daniel shared his story about how, coming from a totally non-technical background, he was able to become a cloud solutions architect. Our today's guest, he started as a actually like a technical person, and he will share his journey of being from a PLP SQL developer to the cloud. So let me introduce Anurag and let me bring him to the screen. Hey, Anurag, how are you doing today?
Hi, Prasad. I hope you can hear me, and I'm doing really good.
Yes,
Thank you for invite. Thank you for the invite.
it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. So yeah, why don't you give some background of yourself and introduce yourself to the audience?
Perfect. So my name is Anurag Kale, and I currently work as cloud software architect with a company called as Polestar Cars, and we are an electric vehicle company. And I'm currently based out of Gothenburg in Sweden. I have been in IT industry for about 8.5 years now, and I started my career in 2014 as a PL SQL developer, like you rightfully mentioned, in a typical, let's say, environment in India where you graduate from an engineering college and you are just put in a mass recruitment company and you barely have a chance of basically dictating or even choosing what is the career that you want to take. And that's how I basically ended up in PL SQL in 2014. And yes, I am in Sweden. Somebody
Okay,
asked
so
from Gothenburg, and I'm also uh, I also have the privilege to be called as an AWS data hero. I have been in the Heroes program since last year, 2021.
cool. So let's understand your journey of starting from a PL SQL developer to becoming a AWS hero. How did it all started? Like when did you think that you should start your cloud journey? How did you chanced upon that?
Brilliant. So again, like I said, when you graduate, I mean, I'm from India, but I'm right now in Sweden. If that is confusing, I moved here a year and a half ago. But 2014, I graduated from an engineering college with a degree in electronics engineering. And as the fate has it in India, there are people who there are companies that come and hire tons of people with just generic engineering experience and train them for certain things. But again, like I said, that you don't get to choose your path. They will just choose the path for you. And that's how I started 2014. Got trained in multiple technologies, Java, PL SQL, Oracle databases. And the first project that I was put into was a heavy mixture of Java, PL SQL, Unix, shell scripting, and all that stuff. As soon as I got into that particular mix, I would say I quickly realized that if I had to do something different and not be in the same, let's say, and not be in a possibility to do something creative, I realized that I had to do something else and something different. And I stayed back there for a couple of years until this epiphany kind of dawned on me. So I stayed there in my first job for 2 years, and after 2 years, I joined another product-based company, which was let's say they had a unique model of how they wanted to deliver software in 2016. Uh, After some digging, when I looked at how they are operating, I realized that they actually had what we call as a private cloud behind the scenes, and that's how they delivered their SaaS product to tons of, let's say, real estate business management companies in the States, Canada, Middle East. And that's where I first understood or got a glimpse of what cloud can potentially be. Um, Curiosity peaked. a curiosity peaked, and then I just started to dig into looking into what exactly this cloud is. And every time I went on to Twitter, or every time I went on to Google, every time I went on to LinkedIn, all I could see everywhere was AWS. And oh, I think we lost your lights, Prasad. Uh, all I could see was AWS, and that's how I would say my first flavor or first touch to AWS came about. Do we still have you, Prasad? I'm not sure.
Yeah, power outage.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take the cue and perhaps continue, and just tell you what happened next. Then I was working in the second company where we had this internal private cloud. It got me interested in what AWS was, and what cloud is, and I then started to look into around internet, found some courses, and took my first bought my very first course on Udemy, and decided to take the plunge, and discover how exactly AWS works. Uh, so now the timings matched, I would say, and there was in our in the local newspaper in Pune, that's where I was based at the time. There was an advertisement which said that a new startup was trying to hire people and set up their first office in Pune. I saw this as a chance to basically get a change in gears, do something, because there was always an hype around startups that if you join a startup, then you get to work on cool things. I joined the start. I took the leap of faith, left my very cushy job at a big, let's say, product company, took the plunge, and then joined the startup. As I joined the startup, in the next couple of days, I realized they told me they just brought me in into the cabin and said, Anurag, we hired an AWS engineer or a cloud engineer, but they have decided to take some other offer. So we don't have any other offer opportunity, but you just have to take care of this job. And that's how I basically started. The very first thing that I did in cloud was actually take my experience as a database developer. I had done a little bit of Java programming, database programming, PL SQL, data management, and just took over and started in cloud. I told them clearly that it'll take me some time to get to that speed, but until the meanwhile, just let me take care of the data side of things, because that is what I was familiar with, and I started with that. During the same time, I came across. I'm sorry, Ashish. Did you try to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to check like so
Yeah.
how so cloud was completely new to you. You
Yes.
never used it. So how
No.
how you started? Like what was the first step? Did you learn on your own? Did you join a training? Like you said, Udemy, and that's
Yep.
good. But yeah, any other resources which could help someone in similar role like you are?
I would say my very first experience, although I took Udemy, I did create an AWS account. Back then I had that was the very first time I ever had a credit card, and I was really scared to basically open an account and just get an unexpected bill. But I just took the leap of faith and created an AWS account. And but I was really, let's say, really skeptical,
Okay.
and really didn't want to do a lot of things because again, first, I mean, very young into the everywhere, very young into the career. I didn't want to take the risk, so I did try certain steps while I followed along the Udemy course, and that Udemy course was from A Cloud Guru, and that was the very first entry point. I did try some stuff, but again, I was very skeptical. But when I went into the startup, like we said, they just gave me a greenfield project, and there I didn't have the let's say there I did not have these limitations of what you can try, what you can do, and the very first project that I did in cloud, which is at a real scale, was perhaps working for the startup to develop a database, working an app and I took the responsibility of designing the database and making the right database choice, data modeling, and all that aspects of data design. The very first service that I started with was AWS RDS with Postgres, and because that was a familiarity, and I also then we realized, since soon we did a POC, we checked out at what was going on, and then we started to evaluate if Dynamo could be a better choice for certain of the use cases back then. Due to unfamiliarity, we did not choose the NMODB because it was a very fairly young startup, and that's my first taste of AWS, and the very first project that we did. Again, this was not a fancy app. It was the typical three-tier app with a front end deployed on an EC2 instance, a backend deployed, and then again a Java-based backend deployed on a EC2 instance, and AWS RDS instance in the background. That was the very first project. So this is
Nice.
around 2017, 2016, 17, I would say.
Mm-hmm. All right, good. Thank you. That makes sense. And now I think Prasad is back now, so I'll quickly remove myself and let Prasad continue. Prasad, you
Perfect.
there? I think Prasad is having some internet issues as of now.
Yep.
So yeah, I'll continue. So now this, what was the inspiration to become hero, and what can you brief about AWS Hero program, because not everyone may know about it. What was the reason and what was the motivation for you to go for it, and what benefit it has? So maybe a lot of questions in the one question I'm asking. Yeah, but if you
Mm.
could brief us about it.
To be honest, even if you look at the hero program description, and if you ask anybody how to become a hero, you will get an answer even from an AWS source, that there is no one prescription, there is no one requirement, there is no single agenda that basically qualifies you to be a hero. So just a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds of introduction of what Heroes program is. It's basically a MVP program, or most valued professional programs, where AWS recognizes people who are using their services in a different manner, or if they are being vocal about it, they are spreading the information about it, or they are basically um, putting some efforts in terms of evangelizing cloud, AWS, open source, or anything in general which generally helps the tech community. So I never applied to be an AWS hero. I was one someday, out of the blue, I just got an email that perhaps you could be a good candidate for being an AWS hero. Would you consider being a part of it? But the journey was not that, how do I say, simple. There might be certain things that could have led to it, and I'll just take a couple of minutes to tell you the story behind it, perhaps. So 2017, around the same time when I was started to work for this startup, the AWS community in the city that I was in, that is Pune in India, uh, they were it was dormant, or basically it did not exist as it exists in today's sense. And the very first AWS official meetup started in Pune, and I just said, okay, what do I have to do a Saturday early morning, 9 o'clock? I just woke up and went to that particular meetup. The first meetup was really wonderful. There were a couple of local companies who were doing some fantastic job explaining how they are using different AWS services, and I just went ahead and asked the local SA who was present at that meetup, hey, is there anything I can do to organize these kind of things? Is there any way I can contribute? Can I use this platform to bring more people? I just want to be active. Can you please let me in? So it took, I would say, to be honest, it took pestering a bit. I was continuously bombarding at least a couple of folks to make me a part of it. And then an opportunity came in, and they said that, okay, we need some help. We need volunteers who could run the AWS user group. So July, August 2017, I started becoming an active member of AWS user group. We organized a lot of user groups, meetups, trying to source speakers, then finding places where we can host it and all that stuff. Then I used this particular platform from AWS user groups as my very first place where I gave my I gave my first public talk. And the very first talk that I gave in a room full of 70, 80, or 100 odd folks was a very, very basic talk, which was like the backbone. If you need to deploy a backbone of your company, what are the core services that you should use in AWS? And I only spoke about IAM, EC2, S3, and VPC. That's it. I spoke about 50 minutes on those topics and introduced folks to that. So taking fast forward a couple of years, I was very active in that particular space. I also then volunteered to organize AWS, let's say, community days in India, sorry, in Pune, in my town. Then I also put my hand up and said that, okay, is there anything I can do during COVID to do this online edition? And I also took in that. In the same time, I was being very vocal and basically sharing my experiences, how I was using AWS, how I took about learning DynamoDB, and I was mainly active on Twitter, and I was a bit active on, let's say, LinkedIn as well. I also took the opportunity to speak at a few college fests and just to introduce people in engineering in their last year or third year of engineering, to just tell them what the cloud is and how it works. So I was being vocal, I guess. I wrote a few articles. I wrote a few bits and pieces here and there. I was approached by a few folks who asked me, so can you help me find my way in the cloud? And I kind of did passive mentorship for a couple of folks, and I think these all things culminated. Somebody in AWS saw my contributions. They thought I should be a part of AWS Heroes program. And I think May 2021, I was basically contacted from AWS to be a part of this program.
That's interesting. So persistent always pays off, isn't it?
It does, but I never had, I would say, I never did this because I wanted this title.
I
I
agree.
only did it, I genuinely did it because I saw that I saw the benefits that I got because I was being part of the meetups, and I was gaining so much by just listening to the people, the way they were using AWS, the way they were designing their systems. I thought maybe I am in a position where I can influence at least people who have less experience than me. Maybe I would not be in a position to help people who have much more experience than me, but at least there was a gap, and I just dialed down the language and made it a little bit, I think, more accessible to people who were in the first few years of their career, and just being vocal there kind of helped.
That makes sense. And let's say somebody comes to you that, hey, I'm very starting new in the cloud. What
Mhm.
kind of advice you would give to him or her?
So, new in cloud has multiple facets. I would say there is somebody who is just out of the college, and then that's a very different challenge. There is also different facet in which you already have certain sort of experience in technical things. It could not be, let's say, uh, purely development, but you could be an BA, you could business analyst, you could be an tester, or you could be something else in this organization. So this is a two-faceted answer, I would say. So for anybody who is coming with certain sort of experience, like I had certain background in database development and I understood the database ecosystem very well, I would say use that as your slingshot. Use that particular experience and do the same stuff in AWS. So that brings to the table is you are not, let's say, baffled by the technology that you're trying to produce, but you are just trying to figure out how this technology works in AWS, and then get an understanding of how AWS interprets running this software in AWS for you. Again, this works really well if you have certain sort of experience already, and that's the entry point that I took, and that's the entry point I basically suggested to a lot of people who came to me with a certain sort of experience. So for people who let's say like fresh out of the college, and they don't have experience, or they are coming from total non-technical background, I ask them to do a very simple, let's say, first project for themselves. The very first project that I asked them to do was, do you have a website for yourself? That was my question for them. Do you have a page where you can say that this is who I am, this is what I do, and this is what I'm interested in, and this is what I'm producing, or this is what I'm doing apart from work, or these are my skills. Do you have a portfolio on your website, in the form of a website? And that's how I suggested people that, can you use certain tools to produce a static website that can be hosted in AWS, so that you can just tell to the world that your skills are not just on the resume, but there are actual skills, and this is the proof that I have the skills, and you can show certain things to potential recruiter or potential company. So the very first project, it should be this small, but it is very impactful because you start to learn a lot of things. So these are the first
Exactly.
steps basically. I suggest, again, these are not the end of the world, but this is the entry point. And then you can manifest, and then you can look at, once you learn these things, you can basically uh, change the tracks as per your, let's say, experience or likings of how you want to take your career.
Makes sense. And what do you do to keep yourself updated? Because see, you could start and
Yes.
then maybe reach to a point, and then it somehow happens like we are not like active that more, or we are
Hmm.
not listening to what is happening, and we go
Yeah.
into a monotone. So
Yes.
how you take care of that?
I would say, uh, I would say that one way. I mean, when I was in early in my career, I used Twitter a lot, because there is a big bubble of, let's say, there is a big technology bubble folks that are always active on Twitter, and it's really interesting to hear the kind of use cases that they kind of do on the daily basis. But Twitter can be distracting, so I just delved into the feature called as Twitter lists, and I created lists of people that who were actively talking only about AWS and nothing else. And I never got to my feed. I always went to my list, and just to check what people that I really admire and know that they are doing the real things. They keep on what kind of post that they are doing. The other thing that from that particular aspect, I found Forrest Brazil, who kind of made the Cloud Resume Challenge, and that was basically the next version of the portfolio website that I basically uh, told that I would generally ask students to do. That's how I learned about other people who are in the community, and then that's how I learned that, okay, there are something called as community days, there is something called as local meetups, there are sometimes online meetups. uh, so I use multiple mechanisms. One is Twitter. The second thing is I try to be active in at least the local user groups that if the city has one, I try to be very active in that. I go to most of the meetups, or at least prioritize most of them. I have been lucky enough that in both the cities that I have been in, Pune and now in Gothenburg in Sweden, both places I had the opportunity to be the organizer rather than just being a participant. So I have organized meetups in both of these, let's say, places. The third thing that I really do is I use the feature from AWS blocks for RSS feeds, and I take those RSS feeds and I subscribe them through a bot in my Slack. So that Slack could be your work Slack, or it could
Hmm.
be your personal Slack, or any of those aspects. So using those as updates, and I put some did very small piece of coding, and I just let's say distributed them into the channels. So if there is a blog
Yeah,
post
get your
which
point.
tags EC2, then I put it in compute. If there is a database, then I
That's
put it
nice
in.
one.
Yeah, and then I peruse those channels as per my convenience whenever I get time. The other aspect that I have been lucky with is I've kept myself involved with companies that are doing a lot of work actively in AWS. So work, there are certain aspects that I come across through work. There are certain aspects I come across through people I follow. There are certain aspects I learn through the meetups and conferences, and that's how I basically try to keep up with the space of cloud. I
Makes
would say.
sense. That's a good one. Thanks, Anurag, for sharing all these details. So yeah,
No problem.
for people who are not in the vicinity of a AWS user group, there are online event also. So that is a good way to do socialization, networking, and as you grow into career, you would realize that it is more about networking, and then you learn things, you get referred, you go to next place, or you learn something new. So most of the things work through referral mechanism, so leverage these mechanism. And today's world, technology has made it so easy. You
Yes.
don't have to physically go anywhere, but still you could get connected to the whole world just sitting in your room. So don't be shy. I would say, like people sometimes are
Yeah.
shy that, hey, I don't have anything to put on LinkedIn. Hey, nobody is saying that you have put something wrong. Maybe if you
Yep.
find a good article, just share it. Why not?
Yep.
Let people know that you are active and you are doing something to contribute or at least learn and share. So that's a good thing. You also learn when you share things. So keep doing that. So thanks, Anurag. Thank you so much.
No
And I'm
problem.
sure people would be reaching out to you on LinkedIn now. And thank you for being here. We hope to see you in some other time. And probably I have traveling coming back to my schedule. Maybe if I am coming to Switzerland, oh, sorry, Sweden in 3 months' time. So
Oh,
maybe we'll catch
wonderful.
up there. Yeah, why not? Why not?
Absolutely.
All right, then. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Thanks, everyone. So that was Anurag, and you could clearly see that there are lots of things which could be happening. Maybe if you have chance to meet up your AWS user group, go for it. If not, check online activities, be social, and then hopefully that would help you in all these things. So thank you everyone so much. We would keep these Twitch live for 7 days, and then we will post it on YouTube also. But feel free to reach out if you have any questions, any doubts, any confusions at all. We are happy to help, and James is also here, and then hopefully we would be sharing more details as we move forward. So thanks everyone. Thanks, James. Prasad has some electricity issues, but he would be joining next time, and we would be then discussing more stuff. And if you have any feedback, anything we can help you with, anything we could improve upon to make your learning experience better, to make your career journey better, just let us know. We would be happy to help. Thank you so much. See you next week. Take care. Bye.